Welcome, everyone. We're going to take a few minutes to allow people to come on. And in the meantime, I'd like you to know that the chat box is open. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Francesca Burack, the chair of BPW International's Development, Training, and Employment Standing Committee team. So we'll be back to speak with you in a few minutes. Okay, welcome everyone. I think we're going to get started now. I have greetings from BPW International President Catherine Broussard, who wishes that she could join us, but she is traveling and will not be able to join us today. But she wanted to thank the panelists for being here, and she wanted to say hi to all of you who are attending this webinar. So welcome again. As I said, I'm Francesca Burack, and we have, and welcome to our webinar, The Future of Work for Women in the 21st Century. I have a few housekeeping things to get through. So let me do that first. The Q&A box is located on the bottom of your screen, and that will be open for the entire webinar so that you have the ability to write a question as it comes to you. The chat box is closed now, but it's going to be opened after Larisa Miller's presentation. We have an amazing panel today, and you saw their bios on the BPW International website, so I will not be reading those. But I would like to take a moment to thank my BPW International Development, Training, and Employment Standing Committee team for your help in developing this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and it will appear on the BPW International website under the section called Webinars. And it will also appear on BPW's International YouTube channel. I'm going to introduce our panelists in the order that they will be presenting today. We have Anna Duarte McCarthy, Principal, Duarte McCarthy Diversity Consulting, LLC. We have Shyama Venkateswar, Senior Director Learning at Ceramont, which is now a part of EAB. And we have Larisa Miller, CEO, Global, Phoenix Global. And together, the four of us have a combination of 120 years of business experience. As we begin, Anna will look at the current state of the business world, the status of women, and what is influencing the workplace of the future. As the world continues to evolve, there are many challenges that we all face, but it also opens great opportunities for women who are determined to move ahead in their careers and businesses. And as the world continues to evolve, the workforce and workers are making more demands and expectations as we move forward. Businesses are gearing up to meet those demands and the expectations by reimagining how they operate. Shyama will be looking at the talent landscape, which is in a flux. You know, back in 2021, the Great Recession, right? Then, more recently, it was quiet quitting. And then there were massive layoffs in the tech sector. So employers are really scrambling and trying very hard, and they're struggling at maintaining a stable talent pool. Larisa is going to be enlightening us about technology and its impact on the workplace, and what are the skills that we need to remain relevant in the workplace. We can all agree that technology is having a great impact not only on the workplace, but also on the kinds of skills that we need to be successful in the future workplace. So let's continue this webinar. And Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Francesca, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And in particular, those of you who've stayed up quite late to be with us. So we look forward to an informative and interactive conversation. And as you just heard, I'm Duarte McCarthy. And for the next few minutes, I'll share some reflections on the future of work and women's participation in it. But first, I'd like to start with a story. And if you give me a moment, let's see if we can get the screen showing here. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see this picture of this beautiful, bold athlete in flight. And just as background, ski jumping had historically been included in all of the Olympic programs in the winter. However, women, not surprisingly, were not allowed to compete in the event because there was a common belief coming from the Victorian era that this type of physical activity damaged women's reproductive organs and made them infertile. Now, women had been ski jumping for decades at non-Olympic events. And after decades of persistence and advocacy, the International Olympic Committee finally decided to let women compete in the 2014 Games in Russia. And on February 11th, 2014, Karina Vogt of Germany won the first gold medal for women's ski jumping in a Winter Olympic game. When I look at this photo, I see a powerful woman who fought for her right to compete in something she loved. And as we look to the future of work, I encourage all of us to be bold and intentional in our strategies so that women can continue to soar to new heights. So let's take a look here at how women are doing within business leadership and the economy. Not long ago, we started to look at the representation of women in the workforce. And there was a report done by Booz Allen, which you may be familiar with, Empowering the Third Billion, Women and the World of Work, to attempt to evaluate the impact of the global economy on an estimated 1 billion women entering the workforce over the next 10 years. The report commented that despite the admirable efforts of these 1 billion women and women like them in rich and poor countries around the world, they still need supportive systems to succeed. Governments and corporations will need to step in with smarter policies that can remove social, cultural, and professional constraints on women and foster greater economic opportunities. And you'll hear about some of those constraints when we pass it over to Shyama. So how are women faring? Let's look at the representation. As you may be familiar, the global average on women on boards sits just at under 20%, and that's an increase of just under 3% since 2019. So a little bit of progress, but still a far road to climb. More and more countries have developed initiatives, perhaps in the countries you reside in, to address gender parity, and the conversation has expanded and has risen depending upon regions. As an example, in France, the numbers have really gone up in a substantial way because there are government mandated gender quotas, and more than 40% of board seats among French companies are now occupied by women. There's also news in the pipeline. The proportion of women in senior management and roles globally grew to 32%, the highest number ever recorded. And the share of senior and leadership roles has seen a steady global increase over the past 5 years. And in 2022, gender parity for the category reached 43%, the highest gender parity score ever. However, despite this progress, the World Economic Forum has said that it will take another 132 years to address the global gender gap. Hope is not lost. There is a strong pipeline of female talent for future employment. As has been going on now for almost 20 years, women outpace males globally in undergraduate degrees awarded. In 2019, 54% of students awarded an undergraduate degree were women. There is still a humanities bias. Women tend to be overrepresented in the humanities versus women who are taking STEM degrees or are participating in STEM degrees. And then just from an economic perspective, women are a force to be reckoned with. They control roughly 31.8 trillion in annual consumer spending, with the figure set to go up as more women continue to enter the workforce. Now, as a last highlight, I wanted to look at some of the drivers that are influencing the future of work. And early economic indicators show that many companies are pulling back on hiring due to inflation and softening demand. We've already seen that, and Francesca referenced that around the tech industry. There was a survey done of CEOs by PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, in 2022 that found that 50% of companies are planning to reduce headcount. And in October, those of you in Great Britain and in Western Europe may have seen that the UK Recruitment and Employment Confederation report said that hiring growth was the lowest seen in more than a year and a half. Now, that is different depending on the talent group. So let's take a quick look at that. Some of the drivers impacting ongoing employment will include looking at things like remote work, the growth and prevalence of e-commerce. A real finding, and we'll talk about this, is upskilling. A future study by McKinsey found that about 25% more workers may need to switch occupations than before the pandemic. And across 8 focus countries, including China, France, Germany, India, Japan, Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States, 1 in 16 will need to find a different occupation by 2030. So that's a significant shift in the need for upskilling. We talked a little bit about remote work and its onset since the pandemic. The same study found that about 20 to 25% of the workforce in advanced economies will be working from home between 3 to 5 days a week, which has a significant impact on the geography of work as individuals and companies start to move out of larger cities where the real estate is expensive and move into the suburbs and smaller cities. And then lastly, the rise of e-commerce and technology. E-commerce was something that thrived even before the pandemic, but has become a significant driver since the pandemic, along with artificial intelligence. And that's one of the things that's also going to shift the requirements around the type of skills needed, higher paying wage jobs, which will be facilitating the need for people who are in those lower socioeconomic jobs to upskill in order to be able to compete. So those are a couple of the things that are starting to impact, again, lower hiring, a war for talent, but within those higher paying jobs, and a geographic shift potentially on where, when, and how people will work. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Shyama for her to provide us with some context around the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Anna, so much. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening across your time zone. What a privilege it is to share this panel with Anna and Larisa Miller. Thank you so much to BPW International for organizing this very important conversation on the future of work. Bear with me while I pull up my slides. So when we look at what the future of work, what that landscape is going to look like for the many years to come, certainly the e-commerce piece, the digital piece, the increased employment of women across multiple sectors, these are some future trends that we are also looking at. I'm going to offer the future of work is going to require intentional, committed, and a deepening of inclusion across all lines of difference. Let's look at what some of those indicators are, where some of those challenges are, and certainly what needs to be done in order to ensure that there's a fair representation of all people, regardless of their backgrounds and their needs, and that there is a driving sense of deepening diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of the spaces in which people work and people thrive and engage. Okay, my name is Shyama Venkateswar. I am a Senior Director of Learning at Saramount. I'm a political scientist by training, and my work is really to uncover and surface some of the big challenges facing the talent landscape and learning and teaching about some of the key competencies that are required in order to make DE&I a priority in all organizations. Let's take a look at what we have been seeing as trends in the last several years. Francesca mentioned that, we have a talent landscape that is in flux. What does that mean? We started, in 2021 and 2022 in a talent pool that was leaving in droves. We call that the Great Resignation. We also saw that there was, a hiring increase across multiple sectors, leading to what some may agree was called the Great Regret. We've also now seen an increasing level of younger employees in particular feeling disengaged, uninspired, and feeling that their companies are not in sync with the values they hold. That trend is known as quiet quitting, meaning that they are barely engaged in their workplace, doing the very minimum that it takes to bring home a paycheck. That does not bode well for innovation, productivity, thinking outside the box, which is a driver of how economies across the world actually operate, making sure people are, thinking creatively. So if you have a workforce that is quietly quitting on a day-to-day basis, there is not much innovations going on. We've also seen in the last 6-9 months a great number of layoffs taking place in the tech industry as well, in preparation for perhaps a chance of a recession coming along. So very much a talent pool that is in flux. Employers are having a hard time maintaining a stable workforce. So this is the backdrop against which we need to now think about how do we ensure that our workforce is properly equipped, managers and leaders are equipped to provide the tools to continue to create employees who are doing their best at their work. So we have found in my organization, Seramount, that employees want to feel heard. They want to feel valued. They want to be part of work that is bigger than themselves. They are most effective when they feel valued. They feel a need for having job fulfillment. So when people are selecting jobs and thinking about staying, they are assessing whether they feel properly valued, heard, and satisfied in terms of what they are doing. This is also a generation, younger millennials and certainly Gen Z, who want to feel that the values that they hold, especially around social justice, especially around DE&I concerns, are in sync with their companies as well. Most importantly, we are seeing that workers continue to want to have flexibility in their workplaces. So even as corporate leaders are making all kinds of plans to bring their workers back into the office, workers are increasingly saying that they want to see flexibility as part of their everyday work, otherwise they will quit. Now, when we did a study a few years ago around DE&I values and how people in senior leadership are feeling about their commitment, we saw 95%, and this is an expected number, of corporate executives saying that they were all in, they were committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, they were committed to bringing parity in the workplace. When we dug a little deeper, of those who say they were committed, here is the rub, and this is where the tension lies. A third of them, of those who said they were committed to fighting injustice in their workplace, said they were feeling forced to do so. And a whopping almost 80% of them said that the whole attention to D&I is frankly blown out of proportion. So people feeling, these are corporate leaders who need to be setting the tone of what DE&I, what inclusion, what driving equity needs to look like. They are already demonstrating perhaps some skepticism and perhaps some inability to bring DE&I properly into their everyday practices. Now, when employees, and those of color in particularly, were assessed and surveyed in part of the same study, those same employees said nothing had changed. The needle had not moved in terms of creating great change within their organization. In other words, it was business as usual. The pipeline continued to be a leaky pipeline. Succession planning was not as robust in terms of creating a pathway for people of color in particular and underrepresented groups to be part of career planning and advancement. So when we do trainings to our senior leaders, here is what we suggest. Driving inclusion in the workplace starts first with creating psychological safety in the workplace. What does that mean? It means that in order to be productive, innovative, thinking outside the box, really bringing your entire creative self to the workplace, there needs to be a culture where there is open, frank, candid discussions. It needs to be transparent. There has to be proper collaboration in these spaces. You need to be able to fail safely. You need to feel that every idea, however primary it is, frankly, it might even be a wrong idea, it is okay to convey that. Because in that mess of inchoate ideas lies that gem, and managers and leaders need to be able to recognize that that one sole gem sometimes is created out of messy, really democratic conversations. So those conversations need to happen. Teams need to feel they can openly and candidly debate ideas and also offer dissent. Second part of having an inclusive culture is managers and leaders have to nurture talent intentionally. This is not a time where employees can feel that they have to advance their own careers willy-nilly, somehow bumble through what career planning needs to look like. This is the time where proper intentional management of employee pools, offering development opportunities, offering sponsorship, mentorship, coaching, opportunities to develop technical skills, for people to have real conversations about what their career path needs to look like. This needs to happen in workplaces. Otherwise, the data shows employees will walk and will move. So in my last slide, a couple of slides, I want to show here, managers and leaders need to create a space where they are seen as a fountain and not a drain, giving credit to employees, being generous with their time in terms of mentoring, coaching, sponsoring, listening to employees and their needs, being vulnerable. Leaders need to know that they can be vulnerable about their own mistakes. They need to say they don't know when they don't know something, and be able to voice that, expressing gratitude. These are all the ways in which that culture, that inclusive culture, that ever elusive inclusive culture needs to be built. Otherwise, we will see that data around people walking, we will see the data around quiet quitting, and certainly the disengagement and lack of inspiration. So in this slide, we talk a little bit about what does that mean? How does that translate? I'm not going to read every single thing here, just a couple things. Fostering psychological safety is such an important element, the root, the foundation of how this kind of open culture exists. This is absolutely an imperative that leaders need to follow, establishing that safe space so that you can engage with each other. And finally, engaging and investing in growth and development, colleagues, employees, of themselves, finding ways in which they're constantly learning and growing. So as we say in our work, unless you are actively including, finding the strategies to drive an inclusive culture, you are accidentally excluding. And that typically lies predominantly in underrepresented groups, marginalized communities, who are not currently at the table, and we need to expressly find ways to engage so we can drive equity across lines of difference. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn now to Larisa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for waking up early, for staying up late. It's a pleasure to be here, and for sure with these true thought leaders sharing the panel today. I won't take too much time on my comments because I'd really love to be able to leave some time for us to have some interesting discussion, which we've shared together over the last several days, and to also leave room for questions. But you know, technology is with us. It's how we're connecting today. What COVID did for us is spur a rapid progression of innovation, and rapid progression in any industry or sector comes from a point of desperation. When we are in uncharted territory, we're forced to find ways to innovate and accelerate perhaps more rapidly than we would have if, you know, time would have taken us down the natural course. And we are at a point with technology where 20 years ago, they saw this as being something that would be 2050 and beyond. I mean, in the 70s, we had the Jetsons, and we really imagined that that was something that would not be possible. And now I look at the UAE, who will be having their flying taxi cabs launched in 2050. I was driving down a highway in Abu Dhabi last month, and next to me was a driverless taxi cab going very slowly, I might say, and driving very deliberately. But, you know, really progressive technology is with us, and we tend to want to pump the brakes on what we're afraid of. And what we have to recognize is that on the other side of fear is the greatest potential. And that's where we are right now with technology. Technology brings us efficiency, it brings us accuracy, it brings us optimization, it brings us automation. It will not make us unemployed. It will just change the way that we're employed. And nothing is as vulnerable as entrenched success, and technology is changing the landscape of entrenched business. You know, it allows us to connect remotely, which we all utilized, enjoyed, lamented during COVID. And it allows us to monetize. It allows us to collect data. Data is the new oil. If a business is not collecting and harnessing the data from their interactions, their traffic, their commerce, then they're missing a very valuable moment to be able to create new channels for monetization within their businesses. And it creates additional needs for us, the need for data storage, data centers, harnessing data, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity will be the #1 job pathway moving forward through 2030. If a child is trying to figure out where they want to go in the future, cybersecurity is definitely sitting at the very top, because everything that we're doing, every bit of the conversation today will include some degree of technology moving forward, and security around technology is going to be critical. You know, as each era progresses, it leaves the previous era to prognosticate doom as it's breathing its dying breath.
Yeah.
You know, we went from those of us who went to school several decades ago, and given how many years of aggregated business the group of us have today, that means that we can all relate to the fact that when we were learning, we used an encyclopedia. There were encyclopedia salesmen. You know, our libraries had, you know, every version of Encyclopedia Britannica. And then we moved to Google, where information was at our fingertips, and we didn't have to go to a card catalog, and we didn't have to open up an encyclopedia. And the information could progress almost instantaneously. You know, we went from a pen and paper writing our term papers for school to using WordPerfect and then Word, and progressing in that way. And our note paper, our postage stamp, and our wax seals went the way of email. And guess what? We all survived. And we are in probably one of the most progressive eras for business, one of the most progressive eras for youth. And for sure, it's one of the most progressive eras for business if we have the courage to stay the course, to not look backwards. Look, there's a reason the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. There's only so much we can do with what's behind us, but the whole world is in front of us. And the whole world is going to connect to technology in some way, shape, or form. It may change the way our youth look at education as they move forward. It definitely means that to be successful in life, you aren't going to need a 4-year university degree like we were all conditioned by our parents to believe. It will be an acceleration of the vocational technical skills. We may be able to automate our surgeries. We may be able to use online accounting services and take advantage of virtual assistants, but we are still going to need a plumber, and we are still going to need an electrician. And we have to make sure that as we are educating our youth around the world, that we make the vocational technical trades, particularly around technology, and we make apprenticeship something that we make accessible to youth, not only in the complex and developed nations, but we have a responsibility to help to accelerate this in the developing economies as well. You know, many of you have heard about ChatGPT, generative pre-trained transformer. That's what GPT stands for. And there is an awful lot of conversation around how ChatGPT will potentially diminish us as human beings, given that ChatGPT passed the bar exam here in the United States with 98% accuracy, which my daughter has to take in July. So that's a particular rub for her. But, you know, ChatGPT is not something, again, that's going to diminish us or something that we should be afraid of or something that's even going to take away from our educational standards. It was very interesting. I did the first AI to human interview last month. It'll be coming out next week, where I was interviewed by an AI. And this AI went through everything it could find out about me on the internet for God knows how long. It's out there. And it took that combined with my biography and shaped questions for me, questions that no one has ever asked me. So you really had to be on your toes, because you didn't have a moment to say, you know, I don't want to answer that question or go back and give me a new question. You had to come up with the answers. And it really forced, I mean, my cognitive, you know, receptors were just flashing because I had to be thinking so fast. But it really took me down some new thought processes and really allowed me to find new ways to disrupt even what I was doing in my own career pathway, and to reshape some of the ways forward that I thought were the right way, until an AI would ask it in their own way and allow me to reshape my whole thought process. It was a really, I hope you'll all, I'll make sure that everybody has access to the interview, because it was really interesting that the very last question to me was, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And my question back to the AI was, you know me so well, where do you see me in 5 years? And that was a really eye-opening moment, to be able to have something that has artificial intelligence be able to really envision a pathway forward, that I immediately want to disrupt on you know, as we go. But, you know, looking at ChatGPT and how we use that, it will allow us to enhance our capabilities rather than detract from our capabilities. And as we know that students are going to be writing their college essays using ChatGPT, and we know that they're going to be tapping into that to get their homework done in a fifth of the time that it would take them if they were doing it organically. We have to adjust the way we educate, keep taking into consideration that artificial intelligence is with us. It's going to be staying with us. It's not going to be leaving. You know, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because of progress. And AI is one of the greatest and most accelerated elements of progress that we've seen potentially in our entire lifetimes. And I say that very casually and loosely because we've seen so many rapid progressions in our lifetime. We've had probably the most innovative advancements turn up in our lifetime, from the advent of the computer all the way to where we are today with progressive AI and where that will take us. So it's how we educate our youth and how we as women run our businesses will mean that we have to allow AI to help us to think differently, help us to be disruptors, help us to find ways to do it differently than everyone else's, so that we'll have opportunities that no one else has. And what we want to do is we want to be able to find ways and use AI to get us away from our competitors and to put us in a way that we're driving the conversation and that we're not running behind the car. Our competitors are all trying to make sure that they're staying with one another, that no one's getting any further ahead than the other. And to me, that's the absolute wrong way to approach business and technology, because technology gives us the opportunity to be the ones that are the vanguards, the ones that are ahead of the pack. While all of our competitors are in the middle of the road, we can use technology to be able to chart a new pathway forward, carving our own path. And, while the competitors are there in the middle of the road, I always say, get out of the middle of the road, because the middle of the road is where you get killed. So let's use technology. Let's not be afraid of technology. Let's help one another. Let's mentor one another. Let's use reverse mentorship from the younger generation that grew up with technology organically to those of us who are still struggling to find ways to hang on to that era that is dying, that it's breathing his dying breath. Allowing us to be able to become the vanguards of business, the leaders of education, and really the ones that will be setting the trends for tomorrow using technology. So thank you.
And thank you. Thank you. Thank the three of you, really. I mean, Anna, you set us up so well with all those statistics about women and where we are today, and how much money, the power that we have as consumers that women really don't take advantage of. I'd like to see a women's strike one day, just so that the world would realize our capacity and what we influence. And Shyama, you and the way that leaders can really create the kind of environment, that new kind of leadership that we have to foster. And of course, Larisa, looking at that technology and how it's really going to help us. So I just wanted to start the discussion with some paradigm shifts, not only for companies, but looking at us personally. Like, we all come from a generation where I know that we all felt like when I got into the corporate world at 7 a.m. and I left at 7 p.m. and sometimes at 10 p.m., that was the model. So how do you see the future workplace? What's it going to look like? What kind of paradigm shifts are you seeing presently? And what kind of paradigm shifts do you foresee for the future? That's a lot. So who would like to start that? Oh, and you will have to unmute yourselves when you speak.
I can start. I'm still thinking about the flying taxi that Larisa saw. It's forecasting and the driverless cab, because I live in New Jersey. For those of you that know, we have too many drivers, and the advent of driverless trucks and cars really frightens me. But that being said, there are a lot of things happening that we're experiencing, and just the intersection of what Shyama and Larisa talked about. We have to embrace technology, and that is it's here. It's going to drive innovation. And one thing that does worry me is one of the statistics that I shared are that even though women are now earning more degrees than men, they are still not represented in the STEM degrees that can potentially lead to pathways toward roles in technology, and/or don't see that they bring that competence to those skills that they could upskill or just change their pathway and move into roles in technology. So that's something I think all of us as mentors and sponsors can start to really continue to advocate for women to consider those in their opportunities as they consider where they're going to move into that next step. The other thing is that the employee value proposition, which Shyama spoke about eloquently, has really shifted. You know, you talked, Francesca, you know, and I will put myself there, contributing to the 130 years of work experience. You know, we thought, you know, work hard, hunker down, be the first one in, last one out, and you'll advance. Well, the generation shift is significant. They're not looking for that. And a Universum report that looks at the top trends that job seekers look for in employers, in particular that millennial Gen Z community, they're seeking impact, sustainability, being in roles that can drive impact and that matter. And they are not interested. They work in an ecosystem. They're going to have professional advancement, but they want to have community impact. They want to be able to have, as we talked earlier in the week, experiences versus material goods. They would rather go on a trip to the Andes than buy a new Lexus. So, so those are things that are going to shift in how the paradigm of what the workplace looks like relative to talent. And I'd love to, you know, hear from Shyama and Larisa as well.
Thank you, Anna. I just want to pick up on a couple of things that both Anna and Larisa mentioned. First is, you know, we are seeing very much a globalized workplace, increased competition. You know, today's New York Times article, for those of you who might have seen it, India has surpassed China in terms of its population. But what might be different is that India has an increasing youth population that are just going to be the engines of growth and change. And that is going, and we are seeing that youth bulge, if you will, in other parts of the world, certainly the Middle East, you know, parts of Latin America as well. So these are young people who are going to be taking on a globalized workplace. They are going to be, you know, contributing, being productive members. There's, you know, vast areas of competitive advantage that many of these countries hold. So we are certainly going to be seeing the power centers shifting even more dramatically than they already have. So in this new workplace environment, what we are seeing, and Larisa certainly spoke about this very eloquently, there's constant disruptions, constantly new ways of thinking, of learning, of creating change, new thinking outside the box, new ways of even conceiving what the world needs and how people can respond to the world. I mean, I can't even imagine, you know, a flying car 15 or 20 years ago, but certainly we are very, very close to seeing that. So in this space of constant disruption, constant learning, constant movement, we are going to have a need for increased competencies, increased different kinds of skill sets, a growth mindset. We have talked about that, meaning that you fail, you try and try again. That is the place where employees will flourish and thrive. None of this is going to work easily and smoothly without very intentional ways in which companies are responding to their talent. So we are going to see an increase in ways in which companies are thinking about their talent pool, finding ways to keep them engaged and inspired. And I am predicting a time where companies are going to be required, mandated, they have to do this, to reveal their data on what their company cultures are going to look like. Whether people are feeling properly appreciated, valued, whether there's equity in the way that people are being developed, whether their talent is being conceived of in terms of their own potential leadership. There's also going to be data revealing on how people are feeling around race and racism and gender and, you know, across lines of difference around abilities, about their sexual orientation, whether people are feeling safe in these environments to bring their authentic selves to the workplace, and whether they feel that they can flourish and thrive, or whether they're hiding, masking, or covering these very important identities. So I'm going to see in the very, you know, coming years, companies increasingly, some now voluntarily reveal some of this data, but it is going to come to a point where companies that are publicly traded are going to have to reveal a lot of these environment and culture engagement surveys in their midst. Thank you.
No, Shyama, you are absolutely right. And the data supports that businesses that have a conscience outperform their competitors, and that customers, stakeholders, and employees will actually spend more to support a company that has a demonstrated social responsibility platform and that demonstrates a corporate conscience. And, what we are seeing in the workplace is a great equalizer as far as our genders go as well. As the generation that really had gender directiveness, where when we were growing up, girls were traditionally depicted as nurses and teachers, and you had the fighter pilots and firefighters that were the men. And as that generation sort of cleanses its way out, and the last few generations have really grown up without being channeled into any one direction, what you're seeing now is a greater number of women graduating with 4-year degrees than men. I think that the global average is 54% for women. I think that may have been on one of your slides, Shyama, or was it you, Anna? I can't remember. I saw it on one of the slides. In the UAE, it's 72% of university graduates are women, and the majority of them are going into STEM, and technology doesn't discriminate because, on the other side of that motherboard, it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. Technology is technology, but a lot of the large tech companies are turning to women to help them understand and conceptualize the way forward for technology, because women have that ability to infuse emotion into their business practices, find ways to engage around family and their professional responsibilities. And this will allow women, as we shape the future of tech, to really be able to put the framework for how we marry humanity with technology, which is going to be so critical as we move forward. And there again, that's a pathway forward that we never even imagined that we would need even just 20 years ago. And now suddenly we're looking at how to take advanced robotics and find a way to make them more human. And, if you look at technology as itself as a root, it can be a bit scary. Boston Robotics had a robot last month that they tested that could morph itself out of any containment that it was put in. So it would transform itself, be able to get in and out of small spaces, kind of like a cockroach, and then put itself back together as a robot. And, we look at that and we think, oh my goodness, the world's going to be taken over. The Roman Empire is going to fall to a legion of robots. Maybe that would make a really good movie plot, but nevertheless, the opportunity for us to evolve along with it and create new job pathways, and recognize that we are the creators and drivers of the technology that is out there. So how we want this to move forward really is up to us as the architects of the way forward. So rather than being afraid of it and letting it progress on its own, if we take the bull by the horns, and really start guiding it in a pathway that is beneficial to humanity, while allowing technology to really flourish and automate and innovate our lives, I think we will have done something really great for future generations.
One of the things that the World Economic Forum came out with is they said that according to technology and the movement toward technology, we will maintain 95% of the work and workers, and we will only be losing about 5% of those kinds, where jobs are going to be eliminated and not replaced. So it's not that there aren't jobs out there. I mean, there will be jobs. And as all of you have mentioned, it's all about this upscaling. So it's not that technology is going to take away your job. It's the people that have these skills to be able to use the technology will be taking away other people's jobs. So we all have to get technically good at what we do. So in terms of Shyama, you brought up this very disturbing statistic about senior management and not feeling committed, you know, the last one about not really focusing on it. And I'm wondering, how can we get companies to be more aware? You mentioned something about public reporting, but how can we move the needle on this? You know, what can we do as individuals? What can companies be doing? You know, Catalyst put out a report that said women are more focused on diversity, but in performance, they're not being evaluated on that. So how can we move this needle somehow? How can we get companies more involved with putting this whole approach into performance appraisal of managers, really?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question and lies at the heart. Like there's a couple things. Who are you recruiting? So what is that point of entry? What are the skill sets that your recruiters have? HR has a very important role to play. The chief diversity officers in organizations have an important role to play. They need to be properly equipped. It's not enough to simply have these positions and not give them the resources that they need to do their jobs. You know, I have a question that came up here, you know, from New Zealand about, you know, how do you create areas of change within a company? And I do believe that it is those mandatory trainings are required. No longer can we just come into a workplace and expect people to get along, because there's cultural competencies that are required. There needs to be disruption of biases. Each one of us, even across this room and table right now, we come to the table with biases. You know, we need to make sure that we are not translating those biases into how we lead or manage or engage with colleagues, right? Because that would then continue to disproportionately impact certain people. So maybe you're thinking, you know, women or people of color or people with certain identities, they're not fit to do X, Y, and Z kinds of jobs. Now, if you're thinking that and translating that and making that into action, that is really the worst kind of company or organization to work for, right? So we need to be thinking about disrupting bias, creating psychological safety, and keeping leaders accountable. How to do that? Data. Very important to surface what companies are going through, what employees are going through. Benchmarking, right? So finding what other companies are doing to address this. Face it, all the companies are facing the same set of headwinds and challenges. So sharing of best practices, finding ways in which companies are saying, this is what we're doing to recruit really good talent that is diverse. This is what we are doing to keep companies, to keep our employees engaged and thriving. This is what we are doing to create succession planning so that that pipeline to top leadership continues to be robust. So when you think about the entire talent life cycle, from recruitment all the way to advancement to senior leadership, each of that requires intentional commitments. Talent management is a robust and important part of business. It is human capital, after all, at the end of the day. That is what makes companies productive, innovative, and thriving. So intentionally focusing on human capital, finding the people who can manage it, giving the resources to HR and chief diversity officers in companies, and keeping leaders accountable for the data that they are going to witness within their companies.
Francesca, just going to add something. I've been speaking with companies, and in particular, the senior leaders and advocates of women's employee resource groups or affinity resource groups. And it really couples with research that came out of the McKinsey's Women in the Workplace longitudinal study. Very often women, and many, some of you who are listening, lead these global women's efforts. And of the women who were surveyed, 40% of them do not have that leadership included as part of their performance review. And this is a significant gap, because those women and those who lead these groups are driving talent, attracting talent, development, promotion. They drive community, branding, and reputation. And yet those efforts, which, by the way, these women have robust roles already in organizations, are not being coupled to performance and leadership evaluations. So one thing I really advocate for is that organizations who value these groups as a way to drive employee engagement also value the contributions of these leaders and view that as another competency that enables them to continue to advance. So if those of you listening are in these positions, please advocate for yourselves as we all continue to do it as practitioners, that this be coupled into how you are viewed as a leader and contributing to your company.
Larisa, did you want to add anything?
That's absolutely a brilliant point for sure. Anna, that pretty much sums up all the elements of today in pretty much one sentence. I've noticed in the chat or in the Q&A that there are a lot of questions, about ChatGPT. And, one of the elements that ChatGPT brings to the table is that it is going to allow young entrepreneurs to step into business much more freely and readily than it did for many of us. You have a business concept and you think, I have almost no startup funds. I can't bootstrap this for long till I hire an attorney to write all of the documents and contracts that I'm going to need. I'll be out of money before I even get started. And, there are ways to be able to utilize AI technology, like the fact that ChatGPT can write a legally binding contract for you in 35 seconds that you can then use in your business. It can help you write a business plan. It can help you write an investment strategy, all the things that may not be your strengths. So, while there are many people that are discussing how we can block something like ChatGPT, like the high school I went to in central Pennsylvania had a school board meeting the other night on how to block students from accessing this, which makes my head want to explode. There are so many value adds that go along with embracing technology and will allow us to perhaps see a real boom in the amount of entrepreneurial ventures that will come out of these advanced AI technologies, that in 3 years, right now, sitting here all together today, we can't even conceptualize, but they will be here and they will be real inside of just 3 short years. So, we have an obligation to one another to stand shoulder to shoulder. I always say everywhere I go that women have to support one another. We can't sabotage one another. And that's going to mean dragging each other into the future, sometimes kicking and screaming. But, we're going there whether we like it or not. And, we have a responsibility. And I think BPW has a phenomenal opportunity to really be the leaders and the change makers as we embrace this new era of connectivity.
Absolutely. I think it's time for us, speaking of questions, it's time for us to move to the Q&A so that our attendees can get their questions answered. So I will be reading the question, but I will not be divulging people's last name for privacy reasons. So let's take a look and see what we have. So we have Mona from Jordan. Love the diverse discussions and each presenter touched on vocational training. Can anyone share what vocational training programs are on the rise and where educational academies should be focusing? What are your thoughts of creative vocational training, such as using technology and animation, special effects, SFX, and VFX gaming? Thank you. Anna, you said you would like to answer.
Oh, no, not me. I thought it was an interesting question. I would turn that over to Larisa.
Oh, okay.
It's an exciting question because, every element of business is wrapped up in that question and where we're going for the future, everything from drones to gaming. And gaming is not just going to be for, our teenagers who are diminishing their thumb. I saw the hands of a gamer. They did a 20-year mock-up of what someone who is a prolific gamer every single day, what their hands will look like in 20 years. And it's rather shocking. If you Google that, you'll see it. But, you know, gaming is going to be tied into every business as we look to gamify and tokenize our businesses and our consumer engagement, better understanding our customers. When we look at what the future of vocational technical education looks like, you know, even for our plumbers, even for our electricians, technology plays a very elemental role in what those professions will look like as we move forward, but they're not going anywhere. You know, so when we look at automation, we look at animation, we look at graphic design, you know, these are professions that are going to require a vocational technical. They're not going to require a 4-year degree any longer. You're not going to have to take an elective in philosophy. You're not going to have, you know, your 3 credit hours of English and math to be able to excel in a tech profession. And many of the large tech companies in the Silicon Valley aren't even looking at college educations. They are pulling from the vocationally trained young people, because everything they need, all the capabilities they need, they're getting from vocational technical training. And apprenticeship is going to be a very important way forward, especially for our developing nations, where access to traditional brick and mortar education is not going to be accessible. Where if you apprentice with a carpenter like we did in the 1700s in the US, you apprentice with a carpenter, you apprentice with a bricklayer, you apprentice with a graphic designer, you know, you then become that. And so it's just reimagining the way that we look at education, the expectations that we have on what is going to make a young person successful, because it's not what our parents had envisioned for us, and that's perfectly okay. And technology is going to allow them to have a greater work-life balance, and it doesn't mean they're less committed workers. It doesn't mean that they don't have the same drive and dedication and determination that we had, you know, working 60 or 80 hours a week and passing on our vacations and not taking those days. Technology is going to allow them to have a much more happy, healthy, and engaged, you know, life than maybe what we all realized.
Thank you. We have a long, I'm going to cut this due to our time and get right to the question. This is for Angela, who loved seeing you again, Larisa. I wanted to ask about the importance of reverse mentoring. We had talked about this the last time we saw each other. What advice would you have to our BPW organization here in Australia on how to encourage younger women to open up and share more as part of their mentoring relationship, which traditionally is one way with guidance? I'd like to hear from both of you on this. I think this is really important. So Larisa, let's start with you.
I think one of the most important elements to remember is that there is so much more to our young people than just the fact that they grew up with a device in their hand. And we're so tempted many times to turn to them every time we have a question on how do we do this in this particular app, or how do we create that, or can you show me this? And I mean, I do that with my own children, and my son David will always say to me, okay, Mom, I'm giving you one more question, so make it a good one. You know, and you know, I think we will learn an awful lot about the future of business if we stop and ask them what they need and what they see for the humanitarian connection with business. It's not going to be the same as what we have, and we have to learn by asking the younger people, you know, what does satisfaction in life look like for you? What are your life goals? We'll find that they are no longer the collector society, having to keep up with the Joneses, collecting teapots to put in their china closets. They're very minimalistic. They prize experiences over things. And there's a lot of wisdom that we can learn from the younger people who see life through an entirely different lens than we might. And there's a lot that we can give back to them, a lot of life lessons that we've had to learn through the multiple decades of 130 years of aggregated business experience to get to where we can sit on a panel and have some of these conversations. But, you know, it's important that the dialogue in all elements of our life cycle, from the way we engage to people, to the needs, to our mental health, to our spiritual health, to the way we do business, that we're having a dialogue across the spectrum with one another, and not just looking at our young people to be the saviors to our tech problems, or that scrolling kaleidoscope of death on the computer, or anything that we have. We need to make it a collective conversation.
I think that's a great point, Larissa. And one thing I was thinking, I too have adult children, and I'm not saying yours might not be adult, mine is definitely adult. And one of the things that when this group started entering the workplace, you know, we thought, oh my goodness, here comes the I'm so special generation that received a trophy for showing up to you know, at an athletic comp. They just got a trophy for being there. And so we essentially felt like this group is looking for early gratification, fast development, wants to become a managing director within 1 year versus toiling and laboring the way that many of us did to earn those titles. So there's an opportunity to, I think, step back and, as you said, be reflective and understand they're not the savior. They do bring courage and boldness that perhaps, you know, we had to our paths were different. And I do look to this generation somewhat with envy and somewhat with admiration, that I feel like they're going to pave a new way forward in how, when, and work, when, where, and how we work. As you said, the advent of technology is going to change that. It's going to change considerably how we look at work, and also thinking about it more as that ecosystem, that we're not just workers and then we go home and do other things. You know, we're going to be impactful in our communities, in other areas of life, potentially be able to have personal pursuits. That's what this generation is doing. And I think we can learn a lot from them about how you can have these wonderful, meaningful lives, looking at it through a new paradigm. So great question. Thanks for putting that out there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Faith from Uganda. What quick advice would you give to a woman in business in a developing economy context, faced with issues of, quote, know-how, in parentheses, technology literacy, which leave our businesses and organizations more prone to effects of cybersecurity, connectivity, beyond issues of access?
No, that's a really important question. And, you know, I do a lot of business across Africa, and this is one of the greatest challenges for Africa, given that the large majority of the continent suffers with energy poverty, and to have technology, you have to have access. What we're finding is that this is spurring a lot of innovation, much like COVID did for the rest of the world. A lack of accessibility to technology, you know, is really allowing women to reimagine the way forward. There is a village that I work with in Africa where they started a central, let's call it a library or community center in the center of the city, where they reached out to Apple and asked if Apple would make available some old generation iPads and so forth for them. And Apple did. Now Apple's probably going to have a target on my back, because now we're all going to reach out to Apple and ask for some older generation iPads. But you know, and they started a community center where women could go and have access to technology. Solar power is really important, because there are solar power technologies that allow us to connect our devices without having to be connected to a standard grid. And there again, where this was, it was women that brought it there. So there's a lot of ways to find ways to get around the challenges that Africa deals with as far as technology and connectivity. Cybersecurity and cybercrime continues to be the #1 impediment to technology, not just across Africa, but across the world. And this is something that is really directing the fact that cybersecurity will be the #1 most in demand profession. They calculate up to 2030, but for, in all intents and purposes, that's not going to end, because cybercrime will always continue to be a problem so long as we have a device. But there are groups of women in Africa that are actively looking for ways to get around the challenges of connectivity. And I always say that it would be pretty powerful if a group of women across African nations were to band together to find a way to be the solution to some of the technology and connectivity challenges, because many of them are finding answers, but they don't have a way to share it with women in other countries as well. And that's really the greatest value that I think women in Africa could share with one another, is to have a collective dialogue around what are the challenges and what are the solutions.
Well, thank you for that. It's just about time to bring this to a close with a few important announcements, but I'd also like to acknowledge that Claudia and Marguerite from Brazil wrote very nice compliments about this presentation, this webinar, and so did Gloria from Madrid. So thank you all for your comments. They were very nice. And I want to remind everyone that this webinar was really put on by the Development, Training, and Employment Standing Committee team. So I want to thank them again. And a few announcements. Shyama had to jump off because she had a 9 a.m. business call. And our standing committee welcomes your suggestions for future programs. So if you have an idea that you think you would like to see us cover, please put it in the chat box. And in the future, if you come up with some insights or some programs that you would like us to put on, you can contact us through our webpage on the BPW International website. I'd like to give a special thanks to Ursula, our web mistress, for all of her support. And a big thank you to Anna, Larisa, and Shyama for all that you shared with us today. I'm telling you, everyone is just, my WhatsApp is, going off the road there, but I'm not responding. But it's just, people I'm sure are telling me how great you are. And finally, I want to leave you with a quote from Hillary Clinton. And just a minute, because I want to make sure I get it right. I've said it so many times, but it's really emotional for me because she's so right on. And she says, "I have always believed that women are not victims. We are agents of change. We are makers of progress. Nope, we are agents of change. We are drivers of progress, and we are makers of peace. All we need is a fighting chance." So let's make this webinar a springboard for us to help create a fighting chance for women all around the world, so that they can be on their journey to obtain their goals. And thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future, hopefully. And bye for now.